Welcome to the Home Business Podcast with Richard Captain Henderson, publisher of Home Business Magazine, and Sherilyn Colleen, managing editor. This how-to show helps you successfully operate your home-based business.
Greetings and welcome to the Home Business Podcast. I'm Richard Captain Henderson, your skipper at Home Business TV.
And I'm Sherilyn, your co-host.
Let's secure, foresee, and get underway. Even a decade ago, the ability for employees to work from home seemed like a distant dream.
But today, more and more companies are embracing the telecommute business strategy of home-based workers.
It's no longer about working from the beach. It's become a whole new approach to the way we work.
Embracing the computer-commuter wave in a big way is Dan Khasis, CEO and founder of Route4Me, one of the country's lead route optimization software companies.
Dan Khasis built his company with 100% telecommuting staff and has firsthand experience about how to make telecommuting work for employer and employee alike.
So greetings, Dan. Welcome to the Home Business Podcast. Say hello to our audience.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on our show.
So you're connecting in from Florida today.
Right. Yeah. It's getting colder in the north. It's still warm here.
It's always beautiful. It's always beautiful in Florida. It seems like it's also one of the country's entrepreneurial hubs. So great place to do business.
So Dan, what led you to build a company with 100% telecommuters?
So I actually have a programming background, and I've never really worked in an office setting. And from the beginning, I always felt like working in an office was really inefficient, because you had to go there, you had to spend time getting there, then you had to sit in a cubicle, and you kind of had to conform to other people's environments, which weren't designed necessarily for you. And so from the very beginning, I would say I would always just work from home and have remote clients and program in the programming world, which obviously is an easily telecommutable world, in that all you have to do is know the code, talk to the people, and then kind of it goes from there. And so kind of fast forwarding, as I started various startups, obviously in tech startups, most of your initial employees are programmers. And so that kind of cultural thing started kind of permeating through a lot of the things I was doing, where we'd be recruiting employees who were highly technical, who had already experience working remotely. And so in working remotely, they were able to develop skills that kind of adapted to their remote workplace, and particularly communication skills, written skills, as well as using visual aids and things like that, as opposed to in the office, where a lot of that stuff is nonverbal, which is a good thing and a bad thing. So they kind of had to really focus their abilities to get the point across effectively, even though you weren't together in the same place at the same time.
So it sounds like you fell into telecommuting fairly easily. You made a natural transition to it, and then the type of company you're building, it's a natural fit, and it's just been win-win from the start. Then
I think that when we look at some of our clients and how a lot of their highest costs, their operating costs, are directly linked to transportation expenses. And like getting in the vehicle, driving the vehicle, there's risks actually driving the vehicle, whether it's accidents, delays, traffic, getting actually presentable to go into the office. So all of these, and then working certain hours, because there's an expectation that you have to be somewhere at a certain time. And I think what you see in Silicon Valley, as well as other tech startups, is you work whenever you want, and different people have different personalities and different kind of productivity time periods. When sometimes it's when their kids go to school, sometimes it's in the middle of the night, sometimes it's 4 a.m. on Saturdays, or when you're inspired. And so I think depending on the nature of the work and also the family situation and who you are, the traditional sort of office model completely ignores all of those constraints. And so
you actually had, like, it could actually kind of have given you a competitive advantage, that you could offer some flexibility and bring in better talent and keep better talent with that flexibility.
Yeah, so that's a good point. So part of that is when you want people to come into an office, you're in some respects restricted to who's in that local geographical proximity to where you are. Whereas we're recruiting in the completely kind of everywhere in the U.S. as well as globally. So there's certain people in very specific, sort of highly skilled areas that you can't just get in the middle of Florida,
Right.
or even in the middle of Silicon Valley where it's highly competitive. So you could get not just more experienced people who are more eager to work, but also at a significant price discount versus a specific geography.
Yeah, that's kind of a good way of looking at it. Most people look at it as, okay, it's a negative. How do I overcome the negative with telecommuting? But it's actually a positive and can improve your bottom line and competitive vice not being a offering telecommuting at all. Well, Dan, with those benefits, why do you think some companies are hesitant to embrace telecommuting?
I think that there are certain things in a business growth life cycle that have to happen, and certain people just aren't necessarily they don't necessarily enjoy those going through those growing pains, and nor do they want to. So I think about some of our clients as well as some of my relatives, and they're very happy having 3 to 5 people, small business, as a small business employer. And once you get past a certain number of people, you have to start thinking about process and process management and all kinds of things about potentially more quantitative perspective on things. And I think when you're in the telecommuting world, if you're using a lot of the tools and applications that are available at very low, cheaper than rent for sure, for an office, when you look at a lot of those things, there are sort of embedded quantitative analytics and KPIs that you get access to right out of the box. How often people are logging in, what they're doing on their. So basically, these tools, they have various kind of embedded KPIs and analytics in them that record what people are doing, when they're doing it, how often they're doing certain behaviors, and so what happens is people are not comfortable with telecommuting tools because there's the sort of I guess perspective that you might be intruding on someone's sort of privacies, or in stepping kind of into their comfort zone in terms of where you can't really do that in the office. You're not going to hover over someone in their cubicle. But the thing is, when you're doing company or corporate work and you're billing by the hour or flat rate, we see that we get a sort of better control and better visibility into what people are doing, even though they might be 5,000 miles away, than someone who might be sitting in the cubicle and you think they're working, but you can't really hover over them all the time. And so what happens is there's a fear that you lose a certain aspect of control when people are working remotely. And part of that fear is that is the inability to necessarily measure the output of what people are doing. And so if you have very clear defined deliverables, like for any industry, it doesn't really matter where they get that work done as long as they get it done on time and on quality results, as well as within the framework of your business. But a lot of businesses don't have frameworks or quality guidelines or of these requirements, and so they think if someone's in the office, they must be producing, so they're happy. That's how they measure engagement or by attendance rather than necessarily by output.
So it sounds like you got to have your company kind of organized to a certain extent and have some guidelines and things you can measure, so that when people are in a decentralized telecommuting environment, you can still measure things and keep moving on task.
There's a lot of depending on what type of role they're in, that you may want to measure certain things that might be a proxy for something else. But let's say you have a team of cold callers, or you have a team of salespeople on the phone. So on the one hand, if you don't want people's kids in the background, because that's going to ruin your company's reputation, and with babies crying in the background, it's not very professional. and it's not very effective either. But on the flip side, if those people are incentivized by the company in terms of financially and otherwise, then the last thing they're going to want to do is have a highly unprofessional environment. So part of this process is, I think that the telecommuting businesses might be doing more effectively than others, is a better alignment of kind of the key objectives of business and the employee slash subcontractor, so that everyone's kind of on the same page all the time, and then there's no ambiguity about what's actually being measured.
Oh, okay. Well, good point. Before moving on to our next topic, I'd like to highlight this show sponsor, Marble Life. Start up an exciting franchise in marble surface renovation. Use Marble Life's proprietary restoration systems. Partner with an established brand with the know-how, experience, and accounts to enable your success. For more info, call 888-988-7520 or visit marblelifefranchise.com or our podcast website for more information on sponsors.
Dan, is it important to implement specialized training to ensure all employees communicate effectively since they do not work in a traditional office environment?
I think that you need to implement communication frameworks and training no matter where people work, whether it's in the office or remote. There's certain people that in other companies that I worked with who are exclusively on the road, but then they come in, kind of report to HQ every few weeks or every few months. And I think that what happens is kind of, I would say, there's not necessarily a binary type of decision of, if I'm in the office, I don't need training and I don't need communication training and I don't need communication skills development in the business, versus since everyone's working remotely, all of a sudden you have to kind of adopt all of these sort of more rigorous standards. I think the standards are universal, and if anything, not having them in a centralized office environment is probably more problematic than not having them in a telecommuter.
I guess kind of a way of looking at this is if you have your employees co-located with you, when you see training and communication issues, you can just dig into them right there on the spot with the company. But when you're decentralized, you got to think about that training and that communication, and then have that training so that the employees will work effectively when you can no longer see them.
I think it depends on your industry. I think that if you're talking about some trade industries, my dad's a plumbing contractor, there's certain things that you're never going to be able to do remotely in terms of doing the actual work. But then there's other functions in a business like accounting, or as you get bigger, business development or advertising. And so I think the question businesses have to ask themselves, one of the questions they should ask themselves is this particular function something that if it's already something that I can hire an external company to do and they're not physically in my facility, then is there really a difference between an internal person doing it remotely and an external third party doing it remotely?
Now that's a really good point you're bringing up. We're talking about 100% telecommuting company, but even if you can't get there, there's still so much of your business, if you look at the different functional areas, that you could spin off as a telecommuting entity.
Yeah, so I think that as you get 100% may be kind of the holy grail in some businesses, but it might not be. Like, for example, to give you a few examples, a lot of tech companies might have their the kind of executive and business teams headquartered in the country where most of their business or sales originate, but their technical teams are globally distributed. Or you might see the technical team that's working in a specific, let's say Israel for whatever, because there's a lot of tech startups out there, but then they really want to get into the US market. And so they'll have the business team kind of remote. And so 100% is in some cases desirable, in some cases undesirable. I think it also goes back to the type of people you're able to attract or willing to attract in terms of, are they highly autonomous? Can they
right.
discipline? Are they going to be able to work, with the fridge next to them all day long, and without necessarily staying focused in their office? And in some cases, I think your question was, what self-corrective action? I think that's a question of, are you kind of a proactive business or a reactive business? And there's a sales coach who says most, I think he says softball teams or most little league teams are run better than most small businesses.
Let's talk a little bit about that, with some of these struggles. Dan, what has been the biggest struggle that you have experienced leading a team of telecommuters?
I think on the non-technical side, that's been pretty the biggest part. I think on the technical side, a lot of, like I mentioned earlier, technology people who are really self-motivated and love the actual work they're doing. It's a hobby for them. So the motivational aspect is, how do you get these people to be even better at what they're really great at? And how do you motivate them both financially and non-financially? The problem is that a lot of people aren't actually motivated by financial. Some people are motivated by recognition. Some people are motivated by, their group perception. And so in terms of problems, there may be certain serious or strategic discussions you want to have, and you want to exchange a lot of data in a short period of time, or you want to build sort of trust or between different team players in a shorter period of time. In those instances, you can probably only do that in person.
And what if you come across that employee who shows up to work as kind of their social, as a place where they socialize, and their coworkers are really important from a human relation standpoint? I guess that could kind of be a challenge with a team of telecommuters too.
So are you saying that you kind of come into work primarily for socialization purposes?
Well, I imagine there's a lot of employees that, they get a social satisfaction out of coming into an office.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, maybe that could be a challenge.
Yeah, I think that you have to, like I mentioned earlier, I think it's part of the personality type as well. Like for example, if you have people who love working, they may love working remotely or in the office, and you may have people who hate their job, and on top of it, coming into the office is even icing on the cake of hating their job even more. And so there's a lot of great articles out there about kind of the pros and cons for different businesses and business types, in terms of they might come into the office, but there's people they dislike, or they might come in and they're really inspired or motivated by a mentor or someone there. And I think it just goes back to the type of individuals that you're recruiting or willing to recruit, as well as your business culture. And I think part of the situation is a lot of businesses, especially small businesses, don't necessarily focus enough about what's my culture, what's my vision, what's my strategy in the business. And so those things have to happen regardless if you're in a centralized facility or telecommuting. I think part of the other thing is, when you are telecommuting, the other question is, over what distances? If everyone is, like, let's just say, centered around some town and some more or less plus or minus 50 miles, that's different than, I believe it's different than, thousands of miles apart. And so from that perspective, they potentially have even more, I would say, richer and more diverse viewpoints on things that aren't happening locally. When it's all local, everyone's kind of marinating in their own juices. They're the exact same worldview. They don't really have an outside perspective.
So continuing on your points about employees, how can you tell when a specific employee is just not cut out to be a telecommuter?
I think that the broader question there might be, how do you know if an employee is not even a good fit for your organization? And then a subset of that is a good telecommuter. I think, again, as part of the recruiting process, at least from what I've seen, a lot of HR departments are really disconnected from what the company actually needs, just copy and pasting job requirements, and then kind of, okay, did you pass a drug test? Are you a criminal currently or whatever? And can we take you into this business without actually understanding what the business needs and if this person's a good fit? And I think so from an HR process perspective / really bringing in people that your current people want to actually do business with, and ensuring that they pass certain technical or non-technical interviews or tasks is really important. And from the perspective of the telecommuter question, there was I believe, hotshot HR person who wrote an article a few years ago. He said, "When do you know when to fire someone, when to get rid of someone?" And his suggestion is when you first get that feeling in your stomach. And so
that's going to always trust your, always trust your instinct. But you brought out a good point that, look beyond the telecommuting, that if they're, that could be an indicator if they're having a problem fitting as a telecommuter, that they might not just be a good fit for your organization at all. And that could be an indicator. That's kind of a good way of looking at it. Well, Dan, what has been your biggest benefit of having a workforce that telecommutes 100%?
Well, I think the fact that we're able to get better talent at lower prices has been a benefit to us. I remember when I was living in Silicon Valley a few years ago, doing my first startup, everyone said, "Hey, if you're not in Silicon Valley, you're not going to raise any money from venture capitalists." That was the theme back then. And then the next theme was, if you don't have an office in Silicon Valley, your valuation is going to be much lower. And then the next one was, if you don't have all of your programmers within a certain mile radius of the big players who are potentially going to acquire your company, then you're not going to get acquired. And if you will, it's going to be at a very low value. And so what has happened over the course of the last 10, 15 years that I've seen is that more and more companies are investing in and believing in businesses that aren't necessarily, as I would call, hyper local to where they're located, and that they look at the totality of the team, their ability to execute. Do they have certain revenue levels or certain intellectual property that is really necessary for that company or partner to get value out of the business relationship? And so, with respect to the question of what's been the biggest benefit, I would say is you get talent, you get it at a better price, and also a lot of people. That's kind of on the business side. On the personal side, you could still form really great relationships with people and ask about their family, ask about their kids, talk about their vacations, share pictures, and do all that. And without necessarily it being a problem. But there are obviously a lot of people who want that high touch social interaction, and they may want to come into an office, even if that means having possibly an inferior job or a lower compensation package. But for them, it's really important from a social perspective and from a mood perspective.
So it's not, kind of hitting this key theme you've made all along, is that it makes your company more competitive, more able to respond. But you also brought up another point here that, if you're looking at selling, or just everybody should be, looking at the overall value of their company by having telecommuting workers supporting you, that could actually increase the valuation of your business.
I think that, again, depends on what I think the question is, what's your vision for your business? Is it, if your goal is to make, $100 million a year, that's different than if your goal is to have the best landscaping company in a small town in a small state. And so you may not need all of these things. You may not want all of these things. And I think it's a question of, part of it is, do you even need that? And if you do need it, the other question is, do you have a fixed mindset, or do you have a growth mindset?
This has been a great discussion on operating a virtual company of home-based workers. Dan, do you have any final points you would like to share?
I think in general, one of the things that we do as a business is help people who have problems with effectively the opposite of telecommuting, which you could say is regular work. And I think there are several businesses tens of millions of people who work in businesses that simply cannot be converted to a telecommuting business, like people coming to your home to service things or fix things,
Right.
or things. And those businesses are unlikely to ever change, but there are supporting functions in those businesses that would greatly benefit, because the actual business owner and management team, and the actual people who are on the road, there are tools that are out there similar to what we make that help improve what they do. So it's not 100% as efficient as telecommuting, but it's much more efficient than what your typical business does out of the box, which is no oversight, no management. Because once that person leaves the office or that facility or that depot, you have very little control over what they're doing, what sort of attraction they're bringing to your business, both positive and negative.
Well, that's a really good point to end on for that would apply to just about any business, including home base. Is look, if you can't do 100% telecommuting, look for areas of your business that you can break off into telecommuting. Well, Dan Khasis, thank you for being such a great guest on the Home Business Podcast.
Thanks. Nice meeting you.
To learn more about Dan or his company, visit routeforme.com or our podcast website for more information on guests.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of the Home Business Podcast. Share your feedback with us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and at our website, homebusinessmag.com.
Visit the website for information on advertising. Subscribe free to our newsletter. Please visit our sponsors. For more information, visit homebusinessmag.com or the Home Business Expo at homebusinessexpo.com.
I'm Richard Captain Henderson saying anchors away.
And I'm Sherilyn. We'll talk with you soon. Until then,
make it a great home-based biz day.